this is Greg Kelly. Donate now to Toys for Tots, which works year-round. Go to toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots supports children in need throughout the year with programs like the Toys for Tots Literacy Program. Established in 2008, it has provided over 63 million books to disadvantaged children. The Toys for Tots Literacy Program is committed to providing disadvantaged children with direct access to books and educational resources that enhance their ability to read and communicate effectively. Go to toysfortots.org.
The Larry Kudlow Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
So polling during this election year and wartime is just abominable. Just abominable. Polls routinely cited in the media, completely biased against Republicans and against Trump and in favor of Democrats. An important point, because so much of the legacy media is opposed to Iran and suffers from the Trump derangement syndrome. And meanwhile, the Democrats may be getting a little cocky about the midterm elections. So let's talk to Steve Moore, dear friend, WABC radio host of More Money, which comes up right after this show on most of these same stations, and John McLaughlin, ace pollster, strategic consultant, CEO of McLaughlin and Associates, also an advisor to Bruce Blakeman, who did very well. We had a great interview with him. I called him direct. He was on a boat in Florida. Anyway, he was terrific stuff. Gentlemen, welcome. Happy and Holy Easter to both of you and your families. And John McLaughlin, I want to start with you. You're sort of angry at, the Reuters Ipsos poll. And I don't know, it's just like all the others. I see the citations of YouGov, and you wrote a piece on that why are they all so biased?
They're biased against President Trump. They got Trump derangement syndrome. And that Reuters Ipsos poll, it's an online poll of adults, and it skews left of center. And I'll tell you that the questions they ask, they never ask, if you think Iran had a nuclear weapon, would they use it against the United States and our allies? They don't ask that. They don't ask, we asked a question earlier in March where we said, do you approve or disapprove of President Trump, the U.S. using military action to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? 51-41 they did. They also thought they agreed it was warranted and justified, 57-33. And now that we're there, they agreed we ought to finish the job to make sure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. The majority of likely voters in America agreed 59-31. Now, the Reuters Ipsos poll that was published today of adults never asked about nuclear weapons, even though President Trump did a wonderful direct address about why and what he's doing in Iran to stop them from getting nuclear weapons, because they would use it. They're dropping missiles on allies and civilians and our military bases. But in that question, they had a question, do you think that the quality of life of Iran is better or worse because of the United States military action? I mean, they care about the quality of life in Iran at a time when we're at war. I mean, thank God they weren't around when Hitler was marching through Europe or something like that.
Geez,
I mean, it's unbelievable.
What's your, in your polling, what is President Trump's approval rating, and what is the sort of general view of the war?
We have him hovering at about 50% right now among all voters.
Yep.
And the problem with the war is the media. If only 4 out of 10 voters listen to Fox, Newsmax, conservative talk radio, there's another 4 in 10 that are getting propaganda from the left. They might as well be Iranian state television or something like that. But if we're hanging on to this majority right now, and we've got to win this war. The price of gas has to come down, which you're forecasting. You know far more about economics than I do. You and Steve do. And but we've got to get through this. And President Trump gave them 10 days, 8 days ago to open the Strait of Hormuz. They now have 48 hours to do that.
Yeah, he had a very tough Truth Social. All hell's going to rain down. Steve Moore, it's funny, the economy is supposed to be nosediving because of the war and gas prices and so forth, but the jobs report that came out yesterday was gangbusters, and people kind of forgot that the one big beautiful bill had a lot of powerful tax cuts and tax incentives. So I don't care what these polls show. Things are a lot better than people think.
Yeah, I was, on Maria's show yesterday morning when that number came out, and literally my jaw just dropped on the screen because it was such a powerful number, way, way higher than anybody expected, including myself. And it shows there's a lot of resilience to this economy, and we have there's a really good small business pickup in jobs. One of the themes of the Trump presidency that followed through in this report was to drain the swamp, get rid of the federal workforce as much as possible. We've already cut 300,000 out of the needless federal workforce and grow the private sector, productive sector of the economy. We saw jobs pretty much across the board, Larry, in construction, manufacturing, professional services. So it was a good report. We'll see, whether this continues through April and May. But I'll stick with what I said on your show the other night, Larry, which is when we get the straits open, the price of gas will fall just as sure as water falls downhill, and we'll see the price get back to $60, maybe $70 range for a while, and then dip even lower than that. And when that happens, in my opinion, Mr. McLaughlin, I think people will feel a lot happier about the economy.
Steve, just one other point on the hotline that you put out, which is so fabulous, Committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline. The real crude prices, you inflation adjust.
Yes.
Oil, okay. And you look at this thing, in the Carter 70s, it was $160 a barrel. Okay,
in today's dollars, right?
Then in today's dollars. Then it crashes during the Reagan years as he decontrols. It stays down during the Clinton years. Then, in the 2000s, it rises to $200 a barrel. This was 2008.
That was Obama.
I think the first one was Bush, and the second one was Obama. Right. Yep.
Okay. Right.
And averaging about $160 a barrel for quite some time. Anyway, now you have it. Let me see. You're down at $60 a barrel in real terms. Now that suggests that it's not going to be the shock that people and especially economists think. It's not going to be the shock because the real number is much $60 a barrel. I mean, really, that's not bad.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points on that. Number one, if you look at the 5 years that Trump has been in office and the 4 years Biden was in office, you know which one had a higher average gas price? Biden.
Way.
Even when you count for the last few months.
Yeah.
So people forget that Biden's performance on gas, and by the way, that's what they wanted to happen because they hate gas, they hate oil, and if you cut the supply, you're going to have an increase in price. And thank God Trump has done drill baby drill, or we'd be paying $150 a barrel of oil today. The other thing I just want to warn about, Larry, that because the gas price is high now, I'm hearing all of the dingbat ideas from the Democrats that Jimmy Carter tried back in the 1970s, like windfall profits taxes and things like that, which are only going to make the situation worse. You're right. When Reagan came in, within 18 months, he cut the gas price in half.
Listen to this podcast now on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Leadership Thread with Dr. Peggy Polonis.
I'm Dr. Peggy Polonis. Join me on each episode where I unravel the story that shaped leaders, tracing the thread that led them where they are today. Because leadership isn't born in adulthood. And thank you once again for joining us on the Leadership Thread, education, ethics, and sustainability.
Download all of Red Apple Media's podcasts right now through your favorite podcast platform.
It's really something. I'm looking at your chart. Late Carter, this is, again, inflation-adjusted real gasoline prices. Late Carter was $160 a barrel. Late Jimmy Carter, late 70s, okay? And then Reagan comes in, this is the 1980s, and it drops down to $40 a barrel. Is this wonderful?
That's and actually 75% reduction in price.
Yes, and actually in the Clinton years, it gets down to $25 a barrel. I mean, it's really quite amazing. So there's a little too much pessimism about that. Now, John McLaughlin, pollsters will never pick that up. They don't bother to do that. But again, if the economy outperforms, the midterms are going to look a lot better.
Absolutely. And by the way, Bruce Blakeman, what he didn't tell you was that, we had him within 9 points, 52 to 43. So he's way ahead of where Lee Zeldin was at this point. And that Siena poll, which usually has too many New York City voters, too few Republicans, because they do registered voters instead of likely voters, they had us within 13. Mm-hmm. And the big game was Bruce ran a week of statewide TV on cable and to opinion leaders, saying he would reduce the utility bills by 50%. Right. And Hochul had 36 increases, plus she had this climate change legislation. Mm-hmm. So Bruce, the public opinion in New York has changed, where voters are now willing to, okay, we ought to do some more oil and gas drilling upstate like Pennsylvania does. Yeah. And we ought to get rid of these climate change regulations, where Hochul saw in her polls probably that this is hurting and Bruce is gaining. And she's got a 51 disapprove and only a 42 job approval in our polls. So she's upside down. And people got their utility bills in March after a cold winter, and they're like, heck, with climate change, they can't afford the utility bills on top of the taxes in New York.
I talked to Bruce Blakeman earlier, and we talked about this directly, and why not open up some fracking and drilling in New York? It would affect, it would be around the Binghamton area, and southwest New York State. But you know what? It would affect all of upstate New York. It would be a booster shot, all because of the spillover effects and the knock-on effects. Pennsylvania did it, right? And I always compare Pennsylvania versus New York. It's like West Berlin and East Berlin during the Cold War. Right,
exactly right.
You cross the street and you get this tremendous, prosperous state of Pennsylvania because they're big oil and gas producers. You listen to Senator David McCormick, who's a friend of ours, and he's terrific stuff. Then you go back to New York and it's like East Berlin, completely. It's terrible.
Larry, it's worse than what even you're saying because, if you look at a map where all the wells are, they're right on the New York-Pennsylvania border.
Right.
So because of horizontal drilling, what's happening, they're drilling down, they're drilling underneath.
They're taking New York's oil.
How stupid is that? So was costing themselves.
They're taking New York's oil.
Solving the climate change problem. It's just all the money's going into
and we're losing billions in jobs plus billions in tax revenue that could be used for schools and lowering property taxes upstate.
And we're talking to two of the best. Steve Moore, whose WABC radio show comes up right after this broadcast on most of these same radio stations, and John McLaughlin, ace pollster and head of McLaughlin and Associates. John McLaughlin, Newt Gingrich's latest piece, very, very interesting. Democrats could get an alarming wake-up call in 2026. Nobody likes big government socialism. Nobody likes tax increases. Nobody likes letting males in girls' locker rooms. Nobody likes open borders and protecting illegals. And nobody likes favoring criminals over the strengthening the police. Now, that's a powerful argument if the GOP makes it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Newt's exactly right. The Republicans, if they want to win, Trump's not on the ballot this year. They need to have their own agenda and go after Chuck Schumer, who's very unpopular. He would lose in a second in New York State if he was up for re-election. He'd probably lose a primary. And then Jeffries, Speaker, wannabe Speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, is his accomplice. And these guys, they're undermining Trump at every second on all these issues, whether it's voter ID, whether it's the tax cuts. They had Democrats vote to raise taxes. Every Democrat in the House and Senate voted against the Trump tax cuts and for a tax increase of $1,700 on every American. So Newt's right. We need an agenda on them. Plus, they would allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. These Democrats are like unbelievable the way they would appease the Iranians. We saw how that didn't work. They would have had 11 bombs this year if it wasn't for Donald Trump. So Newt's right.
So that's it.
Offense. You need a scorecard.
I'm telling you, the Iran campaign is a sleeper issue. I believe, I have great faith in President Trump and his advisors and the military. I think it's going to turn out very well. Steve Moore is going to be right about the big drop in oil and gasoline prices. I think it's going to be a sleeper issue because Democrats have been opposed to this from day one. And they'll still talk it down. They'll still attack it even after it's over successfully. So I think that's a problem. Now, Steve, going to you on the economy. Steve Forbes, talking to me at the top of the show, very kind. He wrote a column about the so-called
I saw that.
The Kudlow plan.
Oh, John.
But you know what? I mean, look, we need a second big, beautiful bill this year. Defense, Department of Homeland Security, right? Let's open up TSA, voter ID, and tax cuts. It would be a tremendous package, and they can get it through reconciliation. You don't need 60 votes. You only need 50, plus Vice President is 51. That's the way to get this stuff done. These are issues that people like, including, I put in voter ID. So a second big, beautiful bill, Steve Moore.
It's time for that, and we should add indexing of capital gains for inflation, because that's something that's A, very pro-growth, and B, most Americans view that as very fair. It's not fair to tax people. You know, you bought a house 40 years ago for $400,000 and it's worth $3 million now, and most of that's inflation, and they're going to tax you on it. So that would be a very good one. Look, I'm all in favor of this. We do need a second reconciliation bill. One of the items we had, Larry, in our hotline this week, that's apropos to what you're talking about, is when you tell people, you know, you got a $3,000 tax cut, thanks to the big beautiful bill, their support for the bill goes up to, 3/4. If they don't know that, then only about 25% of the people support the bill. So let's get that message out there. Look at your paycheck, folks. You're getting more money back. If you're a tipped worker, no tax on tip. If you're getting Social Security benefits, no tax on that. So people need to be. I think our side has been somewhat delinquent and just talking all the time about the benefits to people's pocketbooks, especially at a time when people are worried about affordability.
They've got to lay it out. They've got to sell it specifically, just like you're doing now, with the numbers, okay? Put it in there. How much money is the middle class saving on taxes? And by the way, Forbes had a good point. Why not a middle class reduction in tax rates? Why
I like
not?
That.
Remember, you and I used to talk years ago, raise the brackets, widen the brackets, and cut the rate. I mean, it would be fantastic.
Well, I love that idea too, and Trump and his team needs to just, and then all Republicans. And the Ways and Means Committee, by the way, put out a report, Larry, you may have seen, that showed that actually rich pay a higher percentage of the tax now, not a lower. I was on CNN, believe it or not, the other night with some liberal congresswoman from Washington. She called the big ugly bill. I said, ugly? I said, ma'am, are you against a $2,500 tax cut for the middle class? And she just stammered. She didn't have anything to say about that.
By the way, people should really dial up the Committee to Unleash Prosperity hotline. It's a daily. It's unbelievable how important it is in all these issues every single day. It's terrific stuff.
Thank you, Larry.
John McLaughlin, the GOP, I don't know, they need to go to one of those classes for salesmanship and marketing. I mean, they've got powerful points to make. They get bogged down and stuff, and they just don't make them.
No, they fall into the traps for the Democrats all the time. But what you need is, as I'm listening to you, Steve, you need like waiters, waitresses, people who work for tips saying, I'm getting more money.
Right.
You need people who work for overtime saying, I'm working overtime. The reason I'm doing the overtime is I'm not being taxed on the overtime. And then you need seniors talking about their tax credits. So you need real people providing testimonials how this really helped them in their real lives. And the problem is, back in, Steve, you were talking about, paychecks. That was Reagan in the days when we cut taxes. Mm-hmm. You can see it on your pay stub. People get deposits in their account right now, and they're paying with Apple and credit cards, and they don't see it. They're paying with their phones. But they have to be told and reminded, and when they do their taxes, they'll know if they're getting a refund.
They
can compare it to last year.
Reagan called it take-home pay. It was really fantastic to go after the middle class. Take-home pay is so important. Steve Moore, one last one. Despite your best efforts and mine and our pals, Elizabeth Warren is still pushing a wealth tax. The state of Washington just jacked up all their taxes, including wealth. Other Democrats are pushing for this. a wealth tax, so it will be less wealth. You tax something, you get less of it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is great. It's like the New York model run nationwide. This is not good.
Well, one of the major themes I'm going to talk about on my show coming up is the fact that the red states are just bleeding the blue states dry. In other words, so much of the wealth, so many of the taxpayers, some of the businesses, they're all just leaving these tax states like California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. And where are they going? Florida, and Texas. And how much longer can this go on before they wake up and say, maybe we should be cutting our taxes too?
All right. Steve Moore coming up right after this show on most of these same radio stations, More Money. John McLaughlin, thank you. Happy and Holy Easter to both of you. Appreciate it. And folks, happy and Holy Easter to you. I'm Kudlow. We'll be back next weekend. Thanks for listening.
The Larry Kudlow Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Let me tell you about ProHealthConnect.com. It's transforming healthcare payments, providing retailers a seamless process for over-the-counter and healthy benefit programs. By connecting retailers, health plans, and payment processors, ProHealth Connect creates one powerful, unified network. They empower independent grocers and pharmacies to accept health benefit cards without changing how they do business. With over 10,000 locations nationwide, helping more than 1.3 million people access the care and nutrition they need. Go to ProHealthConnect.com.